I'm Natalie. Hi, good morning. And I'm a yoga instructor. And I'm also a yoga consultant. So I work with people who need to change certain parts of their lives, and we use yoga and breath and meditation to do that. So today I'm going to talk to you about changing your relationship with your MPN symptoms. So yoga is about change, and we can change certain things and other things we can't really control, but we're going to talk about changing your relationship with your symptoms. So who in this room can do this? Anybody here able to do this pose? What about this one? No? Can you do that? No? All right, everybody knows this pose, right? This is down dog, so everybody can do this pose, right? Everybody in this room? Yeah. So some days, for some bodies, even a pose like this can be really challenging. Just touching your toes or getting dressed in the morning or putting on your shoes or getting out of bed can be really challenging. Most of us, when we think about yoga, we think of a group of women, typically, in an exercise room, wearing really fancy yoga clothes and doing ultra flexible poses. Or we could actually think of like a religious ascetic who sits and meditates for hours at a time and contorts his body into a pretzel. But actually, yoga just means union, or the joining together of the mind, body, and for some people, their spirit. Notice that the definition of yoga did not include being an ancient yogi or someone who can do something on the cover of a yoga magazine or the person on the mat, or in this case, the chair next to you. And you know, that's my mom right there. So yoga was not intended to be a group exercise. It's an individual practice, and there are no minimum requirements to do yoga. There are actually 8 limbs or categories of yoga, you could call them. And the ones we're going to focus on today are the breath, or pranayama, the poses and postures, or the asanas, and meditation, or dhyana. Again, this was a system developed to help people to maintain balance. So it's not just exercises and stretches, which is what we commonly think of when we think of yoga. It's a system of helping you to maintain balance in your life. So because it's an experiential system, let's experience balance just now. So if you guys could stand up, if you're willing and able, and probably standing next to or beside your chair. If you have heels on, you might want to kick them off. So we're going to work on balance right now. So just stand normally with your hands at your sides, just like you would stand any day of the week. And if you could close your eyes. Closing our eyes really helps us to feel our bodies and our gaze. We're turning our gaze inward right now. So right now, we're just feeling the little muscles in our toes, our feet, our legs, as they work to hold our bodies in place. Notice the natural sway of your body. Sometimes we can move with our heartbeat or our pulse. And now with your eyes closed, I'm going to ask you to shift your weight to the front of your body so that you're leaning forward towards your toes, and if you wanted to, you could even go up on your toes if that's something you're comfortable with. We're experiencing balance here, and then back down and shifting our weight back towards our heels. If we wanted to, we could lift our toes off the ground, and let's do that a couple more times. Back up onto our toes, rocking gently back into our heels, and up onto our toes, and back onto our heels. And let's find a neutral standing position with our eyes still closed. We're going to put a slight bend in the knee. There you go. We're going to lift our ribs up off of our hips. We're going to put our shoulders, let them relax down away from the ears. Slightly tuck the chin under. Feel that there might be like a string attached to the crown of the head and it's floating up towards the ceiling. Turn your palms towards the front of the room. You're now in mountain pose. Take a breath here. Exhale. You can open your eyes and go ahead and take your seats again. So hopefully that was a good example of a physical balance. And as you were rocking back and forth, you may have noticed that your body was making tiny adjustments that were appropriate for your body to be able to keep it upright. And in our everyday lives, that's what we're required to do. We're required to make tiny little adjustments in the moment instead of looking at that big picture. We just heard all of those symptoms that people are experiencing right now. That seemed very overwhelming to me, and I'm just reading it off of a screen. So I'm sure for you in your everyday lives, that must be extremely overwhelming at times. So yoga is a way to take that moment and balance in the moment instead of looking at that bigger picture, which could become very overwhelming. So you might be thinking, okay, like what does this have to do with me? Why are you talking to me about yoga at a conference for myeloproliferative neoplasms? And what we heard just now was that there have been studies done, specifically with MPNs, that show the benefits of both yoga and meditation on symptom burden. Specifically, I thought anxiety, depression, sleeplessness, fatigue. But you can also change your relationship to these other kind of symptoms, such as night sweats or itching skin. Any symptom that you're having in the moment, you can change the way that you relate to that symptom, which will not necessarily change the symptom, but it will change your experience of that symptom. And you can see benefits from that relationship changing and that experience changing. So can yoga change my symptoms? Not necessarily, but it can change your experience of your symptoms. So just like this drop in the water that has this ripple effect on the water around it, none of us are isolated. We all affect the other people in our lives. And so if there are people in this room right now that are not directly affected by the symptoms of MPNs, but are caring for people who have an MPN, yoga can also be helpful to you. Because it's my understanding that some of those symptoms are shared in the sense that if your partner is having a sleepless night, perhaps you're having a sleepless night. Or I'm sure there's anxiety and depression that goes along with being the caretaker of someone who is experiencing this disease as well. So have I sold it? Do we all think yoga is the answer to our MPN issues? Like, raise your hand if you want to quit your job and join me on an ashram. No? Nobody wants to do that? Okay. Well, no. Or maybe we could just all create a meditation space in our home and practice 3 times a day. But what I'm hearing is that you're already feeling fatigued. So how are you supposed to then say, okay, I'm going to get the energy to start some new program and do some new series of practices. I'm going to do this all the time, every day. Or if you're caring for someone, how can you say, I've got extra time that I can dedicate to learning something new? But the good news is that you don't need a lot of hours to practice yoga. And you actually don't need a fancy outfit or a candlelit room. All you really need is your breath. If you can breathe, if you have a breath in your body, and you have time to take that breath, then you have time for yoga. So let's do that. Let's do a little bit of breathing. So I heard earlier that one of the symptoms could be shortness of breath. And I'll just tell you that if you are experiencing shortness of breath because you have an enlarged spleen or for some other physical reason, this would not be the practice that I chose in that moment. So I'm going to show you something else later, but if you're experiencing shortness of breath right this second, I would not do this particular. You don't want to draw attention to your breath if you're already having trouble breathing, okay? But otherwise, everybody can just get comfortable in their seats. Close your eyes, please. And right now, we're just going to connect with our breath. We're not changing our breath. We're just finding it. We're going to talk about the quality of our breath. So with your eyes closed, experiencing this breath, think to yourself, is my breath short and labored? Can I breathe freely? Is there tension in my body somewhere while I'm breathing right now? Does my breath stop at my throat, my chest, my abdomen? What is the quality of your breath today? Now that we've identified that breath, let's try growing our breath. So growing the breath is taking our next breath just a tiny bit larger than the last. Not forcing, not pushing, there should not be pain. Just a little bigger than your last breath. We're going to do that for just about a minute. We're going to grow the breath. You can open your eyes. So the thing about our breath is it's the first indication that we have that something is going on with us. Even before the mind gets involved, our breath tells us, hey, something's happening that needs to be addressed. So when we hold our breath, if we have shortness of breath, if we hyperventilate, or if we're just holding on to it, it creates the fight or flight response. So if I'm a cave person and I'm out in the wild and I see a tiger, I hold my breath and then I know what to do next to survive my situation. The issue is that if you're having a situation and you don't have to run away from a tiger to survive it, then this fight or flight response isn't going to be very useful for you. So the best way to reduce anxiety in general is to check in with your breath throughout the day. And this is another one of those things where it might seem like that's just another thing to add to your list of tasks for the day. Now I have to add this extra practice. But again, this can be done in very subtle ways. And I find that it's especially easy to check in with my breath during natural transitions. So for example, I'm eating dinner and now I'm going to go do the dishes. Or I was at the grocery store and now I'm going to drive home. There's these little moments, just tiny moments in between where we go from one activity to the next that can remind us, hey, you know what? I'm going to take 1 minute and breathe. Because that activity that we just did with breath took us literally 1 minute. So whether or not you find time to do this transition, this transitional breath, this checking in, just because we've talked about it today, your attention is now going to be drawn to whether or not you're holding your breath throughout the day. you'll likely think of your breath more often just because we brought attention to it. And that's another thing that yoga does. It brings our awareness to the things that we're not really thinking of, these subtle things that affect the way that we feel overall. So, what does this have to do with symptom burden? Especially the things like night sweats and itching and some of the other symptoms they talked about today, like bone pain and not wanting to eat or feeling full. And when you're having those symptoms that you can't control and you just kind of need to get through that moment, the best way to sort of deal with that kind of issue is by single point meditation. Now, the thing about meditation is people have a lot of ideas about what it means to meditate. So meditating does not mean clearing your mind. That's not possible. We can't clear our minds. And it also does not mean blissing out. So if you go to meditate and you don't have this like euphoric experience, don't worry, you still did it right. That's not really what happens when we meditate. Meditation is really the practice of catching the mind going in a different direction than where we've pointed it. So when you're having, let's say I'm going to take itching, okay? So if I'm feeling really physically uncomfortable and I choose a specific point, and I'll talk to you about what those different points could be. If I choose a specific focus for my attention, then my attention is on this focus, and every time itching happens, my mind is going to be taken away and go in the direction of itching, and when I catch that happening, I am going to bring it back to that focus. And I'm going to keep doing this over and over again. And that repetition creates new neural pathways. And now we have more options, really, in general, of how we're going to experience not just our symptoms, but you'll see that it'll impact other areas of your life as well, the way that you're dealing with other areas of your life. So for single point meditation, it's kind of self-explanatory, single point. So you pick something very specific and you focus your attention on it. A lot of people like to focus on something like a lit candle or a flower floating in water. Some people like to focus on sound, like a singing bowl or chimes. I don't think music is particularly good for this, but maybe nature sounds like running water or waves or waterfalls, rain, those kind of things would be good. But usually for beginning meditation practitioners, you focus on, yet again, your breath. Now, if you are having issues breathing and that's what you're trying to cope with, you would want to do a meditation that points you outside of your physical body. So you're going to want to do something probably that you look at, a visual meditation. But for us here today, we're going to try to do a meditation that focuses on the breath. So if you're willing, could you close your eyes again? We're going to be really specific about what we focus on. The focus today is going to be on our out breath. And more specifically, the sensation of warm air leaving our left nostril. This is single point. There's going to be a period of silence coming. The mind is going to wander because that's what minds do. When you catch your mind wandering, gently bring it back to the sensation of your warm breath leaving the left nostril. So first let's take a second and try to feel that sensation. It takes a minute. You're feeling the air leave your nostril. We're going to do a 3-minute meditation. When your mind wanders, please bring it back to the sensation. I'll let you know when 3 minutes is up. open your eyes. So you may have noticed that that's not a terribly easy thing to do, to sit in silence for even 3 minutes. Sometimes that can be excruciating. But this practice of single point meditation is extremely useful, especially for pain. And although studies that had to do with pain and yoga for MPNs, I didn't see a lot of that, but I have seen other studies about other diseases that say that there's a link between reduced pain and a single point meditation focus. So these are tools that you can use on your own. Breathing is not something that someone has to teach you to do. You do it on your own. It just happens, but it doesn't have to just happen. You can't really control your heart, and you can't really control your blood flow, but you can control your breath. And if you can control your breath just a couple times a day, you're going to see a decrease in your anxiety, perhaps an increase in your energy, and definitely sort of this overall calm starts creeping in, we hope. So this is just an example of a very chaotic mind, and when we use those deep breathing and single point meditation focuses, we sort of take this chaos and clear it so that we can hone in on what's actually happening with us in the moment. All right, so this is just a quick recap. So yoga is for all people, and it doesn't just mean body poses. It's your breath, it's meditation, it's physical postures. You can find breath, you can find yoga. And something that's really useful is just a daily check-in. If you could do it once or twice a day, you'd probably see a big difference in your symptom burden. And last but not least is this single point focus. So these are tools that you can take with you and do on your own. The physical practice of yoga, where you do specific postures, is a little bit more difficult to teach to a group of people who have various levels of functioning and maybe experiencing various physical symptoms. So those types of practices should be chosen specifically for you and your physical body and symptoms. So I'm not going to do those physical practices here today, but I will be here, and if you have questions, I'm happy to talk to you about what some of those practices might be. This is some chair yoga practices, so sometimes this is really useful if you can't be on the ground. And if you have any questions, you can visit me at this website, balancedme.org. And I appreciate you sharing your time with me today. I hope I've said something that you can take with you. And namaste.